The weight of responsibility. The first rays of dawn peeked through the cracks of the window blinds, casting faint streaks of light across the small, worn-out apartment. 11-year-old Marcus stirred on the thin mattress that served as his bed. His blankets, tattered but neatly folded at the edges, barely provided warmth against the chill of the November morning. The room smelled faintly of the lavender air freshener his mother always sprayed to cover the scent of dampness. He blinked at the cracked ceiling, tracing the lines with his eyes as his mind woke up to another day filled with responsibilities beyond his years. The soft sound of his younger sister Ava's breathing broke the silence. She was still asleep on the other side of the room, her small body curled up beneath a quilt that had been patched up so many times it was more threadbare than whole. Marcus let out a sigh and carefully swung his legs over the edge of the mattress, doing his best not to disturb her. The floor felt cold under his feet as he stood and stretched. He grabbed his school uniform, a hand-me-down from a neighbor's son that was slightly too big, and began dressing quietly. His movements were careful and deliberate, a skill he'd mastered over the past couple of years. He didn't want to wake Ava before it was time, nor did he want his mom to know he'd been awake before her. He was always awake before her. In the kitchen, his mother, Letitia, sat at the small round table, her head resting on her hand as she sipped a cup of coffee. She was still in her nurse's scrubs, the faded blue fabric clinging to her like a second skin. Her hair, pulled back into a loose bun, showed streaks of gray that hadn't been there a few years ago. Letitia looked up as Marcus entered, her tired eyes softening at the sight of him. "Morning, baby," she greeted him, her voice low but warm. "Morning, Mom," Marcus replied, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "You sleep okay?" she asked, though they both knew the answer. "Yeah," he lied. "You?" She chuckled dryly, her laugh tinged with exhaustion. "I'll sleep when these bills pay themselves." Her gaze drifted to the pile of envelopes on the counter, each one stamped with ominous phrases like "final notice" or "payment due." Marcus followed her eyes and felt a pang of guilt. He knew how hard she worked, juggling 2 jobs to keep a roof over their heads and food on the table. Yet no matter how much she tried, it was never enough. "Want me to make you some coffee?" he offered, trying to shift the mood. Letitia smiled, her face lighting up ever so slightly. "That'd be great, sweetheart. Thanks." As the coffee brewed, its rich aroma filling the tiny kitchen, Marcus prepared breakfast. The pantry shelves were nearly bare, holding only a few cans of soup, a box of crackers, and a nearly empty jar of peanut butter. He grabbed the last 2 slices of bread, toasted them, and spread them with just enough peanut butter to coat the surface. He placed 1 slice on a plate for Ava and carefully wrapped the other half in a napkin, tucking it into his backpack. That would be his lunch for the day. His stomach grumbled in protest, but he ignored it. It was a sound he'd grown accustomed to. By the time Ava shuffled into the kitchen, rubbing her sleepy eyes, Marcus had already set her plate on the table and poured her a small glass of milk. "Morning, Squirt," he greeted, ruffling her hair as she climbed onto her chair. "Morning, Marcus," she chirped back, her voice bright and cheerful despite the early hour. Her joy was infectious, and Marcus couldn't help but smile. Ava had a way of finding happiness in the smallest things, a skill he envied. As she ate, he helped her brush her hair and tie it into neat pigtails, making funny faces in the mirror to make her giggle. Letitia glanced at the clock and sighed. "I've got to get going," she said, grabbing her coat and slinging her purse over her shoulder. "Dinner money's on the counter. Make sure you and Ava eat, okay?" "We will," Marcus promised, though he already planned to save some of the money for her. He hated the thought of her going to bed hungry after working so hard. Letitia hesitated at the door, her eyes lingering on her children. "I'm proud of you, Marcus," she said softly. "You're such a good big brother." Marcus nodded, swallowing the lump that formed in his throat. He watched as she walked out, the door closing behind her with a quiet click. For a moment, he let himself sag against the counter, the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him like a physical force. "Marcus." Ava's voice broke through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway, her backpack hanging off one shoulder and her eyes wide with concern. "Are you okay?" He forced a smile and straightened up. "Of course, Squirt. Let's get going, or we'll be late for school." As they stepped out into the crisp morning air, Marcus took Ava's hand, their fingers entwining tightly. He looked down at her and felt a surge of determination. No matter how hard things got, he would protect her. He would be the man of the house, the anchor that held their little family together. The schoolyard trials. The walk to school was always the same. Marcus and Ava passed rows of brick apartment buildings, the occasional corner store, and kids their age darting in and out of sight, chasing each other and laughing as if they didn't have a care in the world. Marcus watched them out of the corner of his eye, wondering what it must be like to live without the constant weight of responsibility. But he quickly shook the thought away. He didn't have the luxury of daydreaming. Ava skipped along beside him, her backpack bouncing against her small frame. She hummed a tune she'd heard on TV, completely unaware of the struggle her brother carried silently beside her. Marcus made sure to keep up a steady conversation with her, asking about her favorite books and games, knowing how much she loved to talk. Her cheerful voice was a welcome distraction from his own thoughts. When they reached Ava's school, Marcus knelt down to her level. "Okay, Squirt, remember to stay with your teacher after school. I'll be right here to pick you up, just like always." Ava nodded solemnly. "You promise?" "I promise." He tapped her nose playfully, earning a giggle. "Now go knock their socks off." Ava darted toward the school gates, turning once to wave before disappearing into the throng of students. Marcus watched until she was out of sight, then adjusted his own backpack and began the longer walk to his middle school. The air seemed colder now, the sky duller. As he approached the schoolyard, the chatter and chaos of other kids filled the air. Groups of friends laughed and joked, sharing snacks or comparing sneakers. Marcus kept his head down, avoiding eye contact. His thrift store clothes and scuffed sneakers were a stark contrast to the name-brand outfits everyone else seemed to wear effortlessly. The moment he stepped through the school gates, he heard the familiar sneering voice that made his stomach tighten. "Well, look who it is. Marcus the Magnificent, back for another day of charity work," Tommy Jenkins called out, his voice dripping with mockery. Marcus didn't look up, but he could feel the eyes of Tommy's little posse on him, waiting for his reaction. "Hey, Marcus," Tommy continued, blocking his path. "Did your mom finally scrape together enough cash to get you a new pair of shoes, or are those still holding on by duct tape?" The group of boys erupted into laughter, and Marcus felt his cheeks burn. He gritted his teeth and tried to push past them, but Tommy wasn't done yet. He stuck out a foot, tripping Marcus and sending him sprawling onto the ground. Marcus's backpack flew open, spilling out his books, notebooks, and the carefully wrapped half sandwich he had saved for lunch. The laughter grew louder as Marcus scrambled to gather his things. "Careful, Marcus," Tommy said, grinning. "Don't want to lose your gourmet lunch there." Marcus clenched his fists, his anger bubbling just beneath the surface. But he knew better than to fight back. The last time he had stood up to Tommy, he'd ended up in the principal's office, and his mom couldn't afford to miss work for another meeting. He shoved his belongings back into his bag and stood up, keeping his head low. "Not gonna say anything," Tommy taunted. "That's what I thought." As the group walked away, still laughing, Marcus let out a shaky breath. He glanced around, noticing a few other students watching from a distance. Some looked sympathetic, but none stepped forward to help. He picked up his sandwich, now slightly squished, and tucked it back into his bag. The struggles in class. The morning classes passed in a haze. Marcus sat in the back of the classroom, trying to focus, but his mind kept drifting. He thought about the bills piling up at home, his mom's tired face, and Ava's innocent questions about why things weren't the way they used to be. He thought about Tommy and his cruel words, replaying the scene in the schoolyard over and over. When his English teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, called on him to read a passage aloud, Marcus froze. The words on the page seemed to blur together, and he stumbled over the first sentence. A few kids snickered, and his face grew hot. "Take your time, Marcus," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently, her kind eyes meeting his. He managed to get through the paragraph, though it felt like an eternity. When he finally sat down, he kept his head down, wishing he could disappear. At lunchtime, Marcus retreated to his usual corner of the cafeteria. He unwrapped his sandwich and took small bites, savoring it as best he could. Across the room, Tommy and his friends sat at their usual table, laughing and tossing snacks at each other. One of them crumpled up a bag of chips and threw it onto the floor, leaving it there without a second thought. Marcus watched them, feeling the mixture of anger and envy. They didn't know what it was like to go to bed hungry, to worry about eviction, to watch their mom work herself to the bone, just to make ends meet. They didn't understand how much he would give to have just one day without that weight on his shoulders. Marcus. He looked up to see Mrs. Rodriguez standing in front of him, her gentle smile softening the edges of his frustration. "Can I sit with you for a minute?" He nodded, shifting to make room for her on the bench. She set her lunch tray down and leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "I've noticed you've been a little distracted in class lately. Is everything okay?" Marcus hesitated, his fingers tightening around the napkin in his lap. He wanted to tell her everything. The sleepless nights, the empty fridge, the constant worry that something would go wrong. But the words wouldn't come. He didn't want to seem weak, and he didn't want to burden her with his problems. "I'm fine," he said finally, forcing a smile. "Just tired, I guess." Mrs. Rodriguez studied him for a moment, her eyes searching his face. "If you ever need to talk, I'm here," she said softly. "And so is the school counselor. Don't be afraid to reach out, okay?" "Okay," Marcus murmured, though he didn't believe it. He didn't need someone to talk to. He needed solutions, and he didn't think anyone could provide those. As the lunch bell rang, signaling the end of the break, Mrs. Rodriguez gave him one last encouraging smile before heading back to her classroom. Marcus finished the last bite of his sandwich, steeling himself for the rest of the day. An afternoon of determination. The final bell rang, releasing a flood of students into the hallways. Marcus walked quickly, eager to get to Ava's school and escape the noise and chaos of his own. The weight of his backpack felt heavier than usual, and his shoulders ached from carrying it all day. As he walked, he passed Tommy and his friends loitering near the bike rack. Tommy caught sight of him and smirked, but Marcus didn't give him the satisfaction of looking his way. He kept his head high and his pace steady, determined not to let them get to him. When he reached Ava's school, she was waiting by the gates, her face lighting up when she saw him. "Marcus," she called, running to meet him. He crouched down to give her a hug, her warmth and energy lifting his spirits. "Hey, Squirt. How was your day?" "It was great. Mrs. Evans said my drawing was the best in the whole class," she said, beaming with pride. "That's because you're a rock star," Marcus said, ruffling her hair. As they began the walk home, Ava chattered happily about her day, her voice filling the silence that usually weighed on Marcus like a heavy blanket. He listened, nodding and laughing at her stories, grateful for the distraction. When they passed a man sitting on the curb, his clothes tattered and his hands trembling as he held out a cup, Marcus stopped. The man looked up, his eyes hollow and filled with a sadness that Marcus recognized all too well. "Spare some change?" the man asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus hesitated. He didn't have any money, and his own stomach growled with hunger. But he reached into his backpack and pulled out a granola bar he had saved from last week. He handed it to the man, who stared at him in surprise. "Thank you," the man said, his voice breaking. Marcus nodded, giving the man a small smile before taking Ava's hand and continuing their walk. "Why did you give him your snack?" Ava asked, her innocent eyes wide with curiosity. Because he needed it more than I did, Marcus replied. But as they turned the corner, he wondered if he had made the right choice. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, and the memory of Tommy's taunts echoed in his mind. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had done something that mattered, no matter how small. A small act of courage. The day dragged on as Marcus and Ava returned home from their respective schools. The brisk air outside felt like it had settled into their bones by the time they climbed the worn, creaking stairs to their apartment. Ava ran ahead, her boundless energy a stark contrast to Marcus's exhaustion. He unlocked the door with practiced precision, the lock sticking slightly as it always did. Inside, the apartment was silent except for the distant hum of traffic outside. Ava flopped onto the couch, already pulling her crayons and a sheet of paper from her backpack. Marcus watched her for a moment, her small hands moving excitedly across the page, drawing a world far removed from their current reality. He felt a pang of guilt that her childhood was filled with so many struggles, but he also felt pride in how resilient she was. Marcus, Ava suddenly exclaimed, her voice breaking his thoughts. Look, I made this for Mommy. She held up her drawing of their family. Ava, Marcus, and their mother, all smiling under a bright yellow sun. That's beautiful, Squirt, Marcus said, managing a smile. She's going to love it. He set his backpack down on the kitchen counter, carefully pulling out the squished half sandwich from earlier. It wasn't much, but he planned to split it between himself and Ava as an after-school snack. As he unwrapped it, he hesitated. His stomach growled, but he knew Ava's little body needed the energy more than his. Hey, Squirt, want half a sandwich? He asked, holding it out to her. Ava looked up, her face lighting up with gratitude. Thanks, Marcus, she said, running over to take it. He watched her eat, pretending he wasn't hungry himself. When she finished, he grabbed a glass of water to stave off the gnawing emptiness in his stomach. Dinner would be another light meal, but it was what they had, and Marcus had grown used to it. A knock at the door. As evening fell, Letitia returned home, her face as weary as ever. Ava rushed to greet her with the drawing, and for the first time in what felt like ages, Marcus saw his mother's smile reach her eyes. She hugged Ava tightly, thanking her for the picture before collapsing onto the couch with a heavy sigh. Long day? Marcus asked, sitting beside her. Long week, Letitia replied, rubbing her temples. But I'm proud of you too. How were school and daycare? Marcus shrugged. Same as always. Ava did great though. She's a superstar. Ava beamed, basking in the attention. Just as they began to settle into their evening routine, a knock on the door startled them. Visitors were rare. No one in the building dropped by unannounced, unless it was about a broken appliance or a late rent notice. Letitia glanced at Marcus, her brow furrowing. Who could that be? Marcus rose cautiously, his heart pounding. He opened the door slowly, expecting a neighbor or maybe the landlord. Instead, he was met by a sight that made him freeze in place. Standing in the hallway was the same man he had given the granola bar to earlier that day. Except now, he looked entirely different. His hair was neatly combed, his face clean, and he wore a tailored suit that gleamed under the dim hallway light. His posture was confident, but his expression was warm, almost gentle. Good evening, the man said, his voice deep but kind. You must be Marcus. Marcus blinked, his hand tightening on the doorknob. Yeah, that's me. Letitia stood up behind him, her expression a mix of confusion and concern. Can we help you? The man smiled, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a business card. My name is Gerald Coleman. I believe I owe your son a debt of gratitude. Marcus's confusion deepened. I don't understand. You gave me food today when I needed it, Gerald explained, his voice steady. I was sitting on that curb for hours, watching people walk by. Most of them didn't even glance in my direction. But you stopped. You didn't just see me. You helped me. It was just a granola bar, Marcus said quickly, embarrassed by the attention. It wasn't a big deal. Gerald's smile widened. It was a big deal to me. You see, Marcus, I wasn't sitting there by chance. I was conducting a bit of an experiment. Letitia stepped forward, her protective instincts kicking in. An experiment? What kind of experiment? Gerald held up his hands in a placating gesture. I know it sounds strange. Allow me to explain. I'm not homeless. In fact, I'm quite fortunate in life. I run a company that specializes in community development and philanthropy. But I wanted to see firsthand how people treat those who appear to be in need. Letitia's eyes narrowed slightly. And what does this have to do with my son? Gerald turned to Marcus, his gaze steady. Your son showed me something that I don't see often enough. Compassion. He didn't have much himself, but he was willing to share it. That tells me a lot about his character and about the values you've instilled in him. An offer of hope. Gerald reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. This is for you, he said, holding it out to Letitia. She stared at it, hesitant. What is it? Consider it a gesture of thanks, Gerald said. There's enough in here to cover your rent and bills for the next 6 months. I've also included some grocery gift cards to help you get by. Letitia's hand trembled as she took the envelope, her eyes wide with disbelief. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Gerald replied. But I'm not done. He turned back to Marcus, his expression serious. Marcus, I see potential in you. You're a natural leader, and you have a heart that this world desperately needs. I want to help you reach that potential. Marcus blinked, unsure of what to say. What do you mean? Gerald smiled. I run a program for kids like you, kids with drive, determination, and kindness. It's a mentorship and scholarship program. If you're interested, I'd like to enroll you. It would mean attending a different school, one that could give you opportunities you might not otherwise have. It won't be easy, but I believe you're up to the challenge. Marcus's mind raced. A new school, a scholarship. It sounded like a dream, but it also felt overwhelming. He glanced at his mother, searching for her reaction. Letitia's eyes filled with tears. Marcus, this could change everything. Gerald placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Think about it. Take your time. But know this, you've already proven that you're capable of great things. This is just the beginning. Lingering doubts. After Gerald left, the apartment felt strangely quiet. Letitia sat on the couch, the envelope still in her lap, while Marcus paced back and forth, his thoughts swirling. Mom, he said finally, what if I'm not good enough for this program? What if I fail? Letitia stood and crossed the room to him, placing her hands on his shoulders. Marcus, you've been carrying more on your shoulders than any 11-year-old should ever have to, and you've done it with courage and grace. You're more than good enough. You deserve this. Marcus nodded, though a flicker of doubt remained. Could he really rise to the occasion? Could he handle the pressure of a new school, new expectations, and the weight of hope that Gerald had placed on him? As he lay in bed that night, staring at the cracked ceiling, he thought about Gerald's words. He thought about Ava, sleeping peacefully in the next room. He thought about his mother, finally catching a break after years of struggle. And for the first time in a long time, he felt something new. Hope. The weight of a new opportunity. The morning after Gerald Coleman's unexpected visit, Marcus woke up feeling different. The apartment was still the same, worn-out furniture, chipped paint, and the ever-present stack of bills, but something in the air had shifted. For the first time, he felt the spark of possibility, as though the weight he carried might not be his alone anymore. He stretched and rubbed his eyes, listening to the quiet hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. His mother was already gone for her morning shift at the hospital, and Ava was still sound asleep in the other room, her soft breathing steady and calm. Marcus sat up and looked at the crumpled paper he had shoved under his pillow the night before. Gerald's business card gleamed faintly in the dim morning light, its thick cardstock feeling strangely important in his hands. The name embossed in gold, Gerald Coleman, seemed surreal. The previous night replayed in his mind. Gerald standing in their doorway, dressed in a suit, offering opportunities that felt too big to grasp. The envelope with money and grocery cards now sat on the kitchen counter, untouched, as though no one dared disturb the fragile hope it represented. Marcus sighed. "What am I supposed to do now?" he muttered to himself. Ava's innocent questions. Ava stirred in the other room, her soft voice breaking through his thoughts. "Marcus?" He quickly shoved the card into his pocket and walked over to her bed. "Morning, Squirt. You ready to start the day?" She yawned, sitting up and rubbing her eyes. "Is Mommy home?" "Not yet," he said. "But she'll be back before dinner. Come on, let's get you dressed and ready for school." As he helped her into her clothes, Ava's sharp little eyes seemed to catch something in his demeanor. "You look worried," she said, tilting her head. "Is something wrong?" "Nope," Marcus replied quickly, forcing a smile. "Just a lot on my mind." Ava frowned, her small hands tugging at her sleeves. "Is it about that man who came last night? The one in the suit?" Marcus paused. Ava's ability to notice things she shouldn't have to notice, always surprised him. "Yeah," he admitted. "He made us an offer, a really big one." "What kind of offer?" she asked, her curiosity piqued. Marcus hesitated. How could he explain the magnitude of what Gerald had offered to a 6-year-old? "He wants to help us," he said simply. "He thinks we're special." Ava beamed. "That's because we are. You always say I'm the best artist, and Mommy says you're the smartest kid in school." Marcus chuckled, ruffling her hair. "Thanks, Squirt. Let's get you some breakfast." The weight of choice. After dropping Ava off at her school, Marcus walked the familiar route to his own, his mind a storm of doubts and fears. The thought of transferring to a new school, filled with kids who came from entirely different worlds, made his stomach churn. Would he even fit in? Would they take one look at his thrift store clothes and decide he didn't belong? Tommy Jenkins was waiting by the front gate as usual, leaning against the brick wall with his gang of cronies. Marcus tried to slip past unnoticed, but Tommy's sharp eyes locked onto him like a predator spotting prey. "Well, if it isn't Marcus the Magnanimous," Tommy sneered, pushing off the wall and blocking Marcus's path. "Still feeding the homeless? Or maybe you're asking for handouts now." Marcus gritted his teeth, but kept his head down, refusing to engage. He'd learned long ago that fighting back only made things worse. "What's this?" Tommy suddenly lunged forward, snatching something from Marcus's pocket, the business card Gerald had given him. "Give it back," Marcus snapped, his voice louder than he intended. Tommy held the card up, squinting at it dramatically. "Gerald Coleman," he read, his tone mocking. "What is this, Marcus? You finally got yourself a rich friend. Planning to move into a mansion or something." The other boys laughed, and Marcus felt his face burn with anger and humiliation. "Just give it back, Tommy," he said through clenched teeth. Tommy smirked, holding the card just out of reach. "You want it. Come and get it." Marcus lunged forward, surprising everyone, including himself. He snatched the card from Tommy's hand, shoving it back into his pocket before turning and walking away as quickly as he could. Behind him, Tommy shouted something about Marcus finally growing a spine. But he didn't care. All he wanted was to get through the day. Mrs. Rodriguez's advice. The morning passed in a blur. Marcus couldn't focus in any of his classes, his thoughts consumed by Gerald's offer and the encounter with Tommy. By lunchtime, he felt completely drained. He sat alone at his usual table in the cafeteria, staring at the squashed peanut butter sandwich in his hands. The noise around him, kids laughing, trays clattering, conversations overlapping, felt distant and unimportant. "Marcus," a familiar voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see Mrs. Rodriguez, his English teacher, standing in front of him. "Mind if I join you?" Marcus shrugged, not trusting himself to speak. Mrs. Rodriguez sat down, setting her tray on the table. She studied him for a moment, her kind eyes filled with concern. "You seem troubled," she said gently. "Do you want to talk about it?" Marcus hesitated, then shook his head. "It's nothing." Mrs. Rodriguez didn't press him, instead taking a bite of her sandwich and letting the silence stretch between them. After a few moments, she spoke again. "You know, Marcus, sometimes we're faced with opportunities that scare us because they seem too big. But those are often the moments that define who we are." Her words made him look up. "How do you know if you're ready for something like that?" he asked quietly. She smiled. "You don't. That's the thing about opportunities. They're never about being ready. They're about being brave enough to take the first step." Marcus nodded slowly, her words sinking in. He still wasn't sure if he could handle what Gerald was offering, but for the first time, he felt like maybe he didn't have to have all the answers right away. The decision. That evening, Marcus sat at the kitchen table with his mother. Ava had already gone to bed, her soft snores drifting through the apartment. Letitia sipped a cup of tea, her eyes tired but alert as she listened to Marcus explain the details of Gerald's offer. "It's a scholarship," Marcus said, his voice shaky. "A chance to go to a better school. But it's not just that. He said he wants to mentor me, to help me. I don't know. Succeed, I guess." Letitia set her mug down, her hands trembling slightly. "Marcus, this is a lot to take in. Are you sure about this?" Marcus hesitated. "I don't know. What if I can't do it? What if I'm not smart enough or good enough?" Letitia reached across the table, taking his hand in hers. "Marcus, you've been carrying this family on your shoulders for years. You've taken care of Ava, helped me when I didn't know how we'd make it through the month, and you've done it all without complaint. If anyone can handle this, it's you." Her words brought tears to his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. "What if I fail?" "Then you get back up and try again," Letitia said firmly. "But you can't let fear stop you from trying. This is your chance, Marcus, and you deserve it." Marcus nodded, his resolve hardening. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll do it." A new beginning. The next morning, Marcus called the number on Gerald's card. His voice shook as he left a message, but when Gerald called back, his warm and encouraging tone made Marcus feel at ease. Plans were made, forms were signed, and within a week, Marcus was preparing for his first day at the new school. The night before, as he lay in bed, he stared at the cracked ceiling and felt a strange mix of fear and excitement. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like maybe, just maybe, things could get better. As he drifted off to sleep, he thought of Ava's words, "That's because we are special." And for the first time, he believed it. The first day of change. The morning sun filtered through the apartment windows, casting a warm glow that Marcus rarely associated with hope. Today was different. It was his first day at his new school, one that promised opportunities he had never dreamed of. The scholarship from Gerald Coleman felt like a ticket to a different world, yet the weight of expectations loomed over him like a storm cloud. Marcus's reflection in the cracked bathroom mirror showed a mixture of emotions: nervousness, determination, and a hint of excitement. He adjusted the collar of his freshly pressed shirt, a gift from Gerald, who had ensured Marcus would have new clothes for his new beginning. It fit better than anything he'd ever owned, but he still felt out of place wearing it. "Marcus, are you ready?" His mother called from the kitchen. "Almost, Mom," he replied, grabbing his backpack. Ava peeked around the corner, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Do you think the kids there will be nice?" she asked, her voice innocent and hopeful. "I don't know, Squirt," Marcus admitted, "but I'll figure it out." Ava grinned, her faith in him unwavering. "You're going to be amazing." Marcus gave her a quick hug before heading to the kitchen, where his mom was waiting with a breakfast plate of scrambled eggs and toast. It was more than they usually had, thanks to the grocery gift cards Gerald had given them. Letitia smiled, her pride shining through her exhaustion. "You're going to do great," she said as he sat down. "And remember, it's okay to be nervous. Just be yourself." Marcus nodded, though the knot in his stomach made eating difficult. After finishing half the plate, he stood, ready to face the day. His mom kissed his forehead, a rare moment of tenderness that made his chest tighten. Entering a new world, Marcus stepped off the bus and stared at the towering building in front of him. The new school was nothing like his old one. The facade gleamed with clean windows, and the grounds were immaculate, lined with manicured hedges and a sprawling lawn. Students milled about, their clothes crisp and new, their laughter and chatter filling the air. He felt like an outsider the moment he walked through the gates. The other kids seemed to exude confidence, moving in groups as though they'd known each other forever. Marcus clutched the straps of his backpack, trying to steady his nerves as he navigated the unfamiliar hallways. At the front office, a cheerful receptionist handed him his schedule and a map of the school. "Welcome, Marcus," she said warmly. "You'll do great here." Marcus managed a small smile before heading to his first class. The hallways were wide and brightly lit, lined with lockers that gleamed as though they'd just been installed. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, drawing the occasional glance from other students. As he entered the classroom, the chatter paused momentarily, and all eyes turned to him. Marcus swallowed hard, gripping his schedule tightly as the teacher, a tall man with glasses, smiled at him. "You must be Marcus," the teacher said. "Welcome to our class. Why don't you introduce yourself?" Marcus's throat felt dry, but he managed to speak. "Hi, I'm Marcus. I just transferred here." "Welcome, Marcus," the teacher said, motioning to an empty seat near the middle of the room. "Take a seat, and we'll get started." As Marcus walked to his desk, he heard whispers around him, curious murmurs about the new kid. He kept his head down, determined not to let the attention rattle him. The first test. The first few classes were a whirlwind. The pace was faster than he was used to, and the lessons seemed more advanced. Marcus felt like he was playing catch-up, scribbling notes as quickly as he could. He couldn't shake the feeling that everyone else was miles ahead of him. At lunchtime, he found himself wandering the cafeteria, searching for an empty table. The room was a sea of cliques, athletes, artists, and kids who looked like they had stepped out of a fashion magazine. He finally spotted a small table near the corner and sat down, pulling out the sandwich his mom had packed for him. "Hey, new kid," a voice called out. Marcus looked up to see a boy his age approaching, flanked by two others. The boy had a mischievous grin, and his clothes were immaculate. "I'm Ethan. You're Marcus, right?" "Yeah," Marcus replied cautiously. Ethan plopped down across from him, his friends taking the seats beside him. "So, where'd you come from? You don't exactly look like you're from around here." Marcus felt his cheeks flush. "Just another school," he said, avoiding Ethan's gaze. Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Let me guess. Scholarship kid." Marcus's grip on his sandwich tightened. "Yeah. So?" Ethan smirked. "Relax, man. I'm just messing with you. It's cool. Not everyone here gets handed life on a silver platter." Marcus wasn't sure how to respond, so he stayed quiet. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying him. "Well, good luck. This place can be tough." With that, Ethan and his friends stood and walked away, leaving Marcus alone. He couldn't tell if the interaction had been friendly or a veiled warning, but it left him feeling unsettled. The mentor's visit. After school, Marcus waited by the front steps for Gerald, who had promised to pick him up. Sure enough, a sleek black car pulled up, and Gerald stepped out, his polished shoes clicking against the pavement. "Marcus," Gerald greeted him warmly. "How was your first day?" "It was okay," Marcus said, shrugging. Gerald nodded, his expression understanding. "It can be overwhelming at first, but remember, you belong here just as much as anyone else." They drove to a nearby cafe, where Gerald ordered them hot chocolate and sat across from Marcus. "I wanted to check in with you," Gerald said. Starting somewhere new is never easy, but I want you to know you have people rooting for you. Marcus sipped his hot chocolate, the warmth soothing his nerves. It's just, everyone there seems so much smarter than me, and they all know each other already. I feel like I don't fit in. Gerald leaned forward, his gaze steady. Marcus, fitting in isn't about changing who you are. It's about finding the courage to show people your true self. You're here because you've already proven you have that courage. Marcus thought about his act of kindness, the granola bar he'd shared with Gerald, not knowing who he was. He'd acted out of compassion, not because he wanted recognition. Maybe Gerald was right. Maybe he did belong. A glimmer of confidence. The next day, Marcus approached school with a slightly lighter heart. He still felt like an outsider, but Gerald's words echoed in his mind. As he walked into his first class, he noticed a girl struggling to carry a stack of books. Without thinking, he stepped forward. "Need a hand?" he asked. The girl looked up, surprised but grateful. "Thanks," she said as he helped her balance the pile. "I'm Sophia, by the way." "Marcus," he replied, smiling. Sophia walked with him to class, chatting about their teacher's quirks and the upcoming science fair. For the first time, Marcus felt like he was beginning to connect with someone. By the end of the day, he had shared a table with Sophia during lunch, and she had introduced him to a few of her friends. Though he still felt the weight of being the new kid, Marcus realized he didn't have to face it alone. Small acts of kindness, like the one he had shown Gerald, were starting to build bridges in his new world. Finding his place. The first few weeks at Marcus's new school were a whirlwind of adjustment, self-doubt, and small victories. Each morning, he woke up determined to make the most of the opportunity Gerald had given him. But the reality of his new environment was far from easy. The halls were filled with students who exuded confidence, walking in groups that seemed impenetrable to an outsider. Yet Marcus refused to let himself fade into the background. He kept his head down and worked hard in class. His teachers noticed his focus, and though he didn't participate much at first, his diligent work earned their approval. But outside the classroom, the social dynamics were more difficult to navigate. The students seemed friendly on the surface, but Marcus often caught snippets of whispered conversations about the scholarship kid. He didn't know if they were judging him, pitying him, or just curious, but it made every interaction feel like walking a tightrope. Sophia, the girl he had helped with the books, became his first real friend. She was smart, outspoken, and seemed unbothered by the social hierarchies that ruled the school. Marcus admired her confidence and found himself relaxing in her company. She introduced him to her small circle of friends, a boy named Liam, who was a tech whiz, and a girl named Priya, who loved art. They weren't the most popular kids, but they were kind and welcoming, and for the first time, Marcus began to feel like he had a place. The Debate Club Challenge. One afternoon, Marcus walked past a bulletin board near the library and saw a flyer for the debate club tryouts. He stopped, reading the bold letters over and over. Gerald had mentioned that participating in extracurricular activities was a good way to stand out and build confidence. But the idea of speaking in front of a room full of strangers made Marcus's stomach twist. "You should do it," Sophia's voice startled him. She had appeared behind him, reading the flyer over his shoulder. Marcus shook his head. "I'm not good at talking in front of people." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "You're good at standing up for yourself. I've seen it, and you've got a lot to say, even if you don't realize it yet." Marcus hesitated. He remembered Gerald's words about courage and about showing people who he really was. Maybe this was his chance. "Okay," he said finally. "I'll try." The tryouts were held in a small classroom after school, and Marcus's nerves were at an all-time high as he walked in. The room was filled with students who seemed completely at ease, chatting and laughing as they prepared their notes. Marcus clutched his notebook tightly, feeling like an imposter. When it was his turn, his hands trembled as he stood at the front of the room. The topic was simple. Should school uniforms be mandatory? But his mind went blank as he stared at the expectant faces. Then he spotted Sophia in the back of the room, giving him an encouraging nod. He took a deep breath and began to speak. His voice was shaky at first, but as he found his rhythm, he remembered the debates he used to have with Ava about bedtime or with his mom about doing chores. He used those memories to fuel his arguments, and by the time he finished, the room was silent. The debate coach, a sharp-eyed woman with a kind smile, clapped first, and the rest of the room followed. "Well done, Marcus," the coach said. "You've got potential." Marcus couldn't believe it. He had done it. He had faced his fear and come out stronger. The ripple effect. Joining the debate club marked a turning point for Marcus. It wasn't just about learning to argue or presenting ideas. It was about finding his voice. Week by week, his confidence grew as he prepared for meetings, practiced speeches, and worked with his teammates. He discovered that he was good at crafting persuasive arguments and thinking on his feet. For the first time, he felt like he was contributing something valuable. Gerald noticed the change during their weekly check-ins. They often met at a small cafe near the school, where Marcus would share updates about his classes and activities. Gerald listened intently, offering advice and encouragement. "You're finding your stride," Gerald said one evening. "That's what I knew you could do. How does it feel?" "It feels different," Marcus admitted. "Like I'm starting to fit in. But I still feel like I don't belong sometimes." Gerald leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Belonging isn't about where you come from, Marcus. It's about what you bring to the table. And you've got more to offer than most people realize." Those words stuck with Marcus. Slowly, he began to let go of the self-doubt that had clung to him since the day he arrived at the school. The family connection. At home, Marcus's transformation didn't go unnoticed. Letitia saw the way he carried himself differently, with more confidence and purpose. Ava, too, picked up on the change. "Marcus, are you famous now?" Ava asked one evening as they sat at the kitchen table, doing homework. Marcus laughed. "Not even close, squirt." "Why?" "Because you talk like one of those people on TV," she said, mimicking the news anchor's voice. "Breaking news. Marcus saves the day." Letitia chuckled from the couch, where she was folding laundry. "She's not wrong, you know. You're becoming a leader, Marcus. I'm proud of you." Her words made Marcus's chest swell with pride. For so long, he had felt like he was barely keeping his head above water, trying to juggle school, Ava, and their struggles at home. Now he felt like he was making progress, not just for himself, but for his family. The first competition. The debate club's first competition was approaching, and Marcus was chosen to represent the school in the novice category. It was a huge responsibility, and the pressure weighed heavily on him. Gerald helped him prepare, coaching him on how to handle tough questions and stay calm under pressure. "Remember," Gerald said during one session, "it's not about winning. It's about showing up, speaking your truth, and giving it your all." When the day of the competition arrived, Marcus stood backstage, his heart pounding. He could hear the murmur of the audience and the sharp voices of other competitors delivering their arguments. He glanced at Sophia, who was competing in a different category, and she gave him a thumbs up. "You've got this," she mouthed. When his name was called, Marcus stepped onto the stage, his legs feeling like jelly. But as he faced the judges and audience, he took a deep breath and began to speak. He argued passionately, drawing on everything he had learned in practice and from his own experiences. He stumbled once but quickly recovered, earning a nod of approval from one of the judges. By the time he finished, the applause was deafening. Marcus couldn't stop smiling as he returned to his seat, the weight of his nerves finally lifting. Celebration and reflection. Marcus didn't win first place, but he didn't care. He had shown himself, and everyone else, that he was capable of standing on that stage and holding his own. That night, Gerald treated Marcus and his family to dinner at a local diner to celebrate. As they ate, Ava chattered excitedly about her school projects, and Letitia beamed with pride. Gerald watched the family with a satisfied smile, knowing that this was just the beginning of Marcus's journey. "You've come a long way, Marcus," Gerald said as they finished their meal. "But this is only the start. Keep pushing, keep striving, and remember, every step forward is a victory." Marcus nodded, his determination solidifying. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he was ready to face them. He wasn't just surviving anymore, he was thriving. Turning point. The air was crisp on the morning of Marcus's second debate competition. Autumn leaves swirled in golden and red hues as Marcus stepped off the bus and onto the neatly paved walkway leading to the school gymnasium. This wasn't just another debate. This one was important. It wasn't about proving himself to others anymore. It was about proving to himself that he belonged. As he walked inside, the buzz of nervous competitors and chattering spectators filled the air. Marcus clutched his note cards tightly, going over his points for the 100th time. His argument was solid, but he couldn't shake the nervous energy coursing through him. Gerald had told him that nerves meant he cared, but at that moment, Marcus would have traded caring for a calm mind. "Hey, Marcus," Sophia's voice brought him back to the present. She was standing by the registration desk, a wide grin on her face. "You ready for this?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Marcus replied, forcing a smile. "You're going to crush it," she said confidently. "And remember, just breathe. You've got this." Her words, simple yet encouraging, settled some of the chaos in Marcus's mind. He nodded, taking a deep breath as they parted ways to prepare for their respective events. The competition. Marcus's heart raced as he entered the room for the first round. The debate was structured as a series of one-on-one rounds, each judged on content, delivery, and engagement. His first opponent was a boy named Nathan, who wore an air of confidence like a badge. The topic was announced: should technology in schools replace traditional teaching methods? Nathan opened with a polished argument, weaving statistics and anecdotes together seamlessly. Marcus listened intently, jotting down notes as he prepared his rebuttal. When it was his turn, he stood, feeling the weight of every eye in the room. But then, something clicked. He thought back to Gerald's advice. "Speak your truth." Marcus started slowly, his voice steady but firm. He argued that while technology had its place, the human connection between teacher and student was irreplaceable. He drew from his own experiences, how teachers like Mrs. Rodriguez had made him feel seen and supported in ways no device ever could. His argument wasn't just logical, it was heartfelt. When the round ended, the judge smiled warmly at Marcus. "Excellent points, Marcus. Well done." He moved on to the next round, and then the next. Each debate became a little easier as his confidence grew. By the end of the day, he had made it to the semifinals, a feat that felt almost surreal. The unexpected encounter. Between rounds, Marcus stepped outside to get some fresh air. The crisp breeze was a welcome relief from the crowded rooms inside. As he leaned against the railing, lost in thought, a familiar voice broke through the quiet. "Well, look who it is. Marcus, the debate prodigy." Marcus turned to see Tommy Jenkins standing a few feet away, a smirk plastered on his face. For a moment, Marcus couldn't believe his eyes. Tommy, the bully from his old school, was here, and judging by the badge around his neck, he was also a competitor. "What are you doing here?" Marcus asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "Same thing as you," Tommy replied, crossing his arms. "Competing. Didn't expect to see you, though. This doesn't seem like your kind of scene." Marcus straightened, refusing to let Tommy intimidate him. People can change. Tommy raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by Marcus's confidence. "Guess we'll see," he said before walking away. The encounter left Marcus shaken but determined. He hadn't expected to face someone from his past here, but he realized that this was an opportunity to prove, once and for all, that he was no longer the same scared kid Tommy used to pick on. Facing the semifinals. The semifinal round was intense. Marcus was up against a girl named Clara, who had a reputation as one of the best debaters in the circuit. The topic was challenging. Is individual success more important than community well-being? Clara opened with a sharp, well-reasoned argument about the value of personal ambition. She cited examples of inventors and leaders who had driven progress through their individual efforts. The room seemed to hang on her every word. Marcus knew he had his work cut out for him, but he refused to let doubt creep in. When it was his turn, he spoke about the power of community, drawing on his experiences growing up in a tight-knit neighborhood where people supported each other through difficult times. He talked about how Gerald's kindness had changed his life, emphasizing that success was most meaningful when shared. As he finished, the room was silent for a moment before breaking into applause. Clara smiled, acknowledging his strong performance. When the judge announced Marcus as the winner of the round, he felt a surge of pride. He had made it to the finals. The final round. The final round was held in the main auditorium, with an audience of students, parents, and teachers. Marcus's heart pounded as he stepped onto the stage. His opponent was none other than Tommy Jenkins. Tommy smirked as they shook hands before the debate. "Small world, huh?" he said, his tone dripping with sarcasm. Marcus didn't respond. He was focused. This was more than a debate. It was a chance to prove to himself and to Tommy that he was no longer the kid who could be pushed around. The topic was announced. Should wealth distribution be prioritized over economic growth? It was complex, and Marcus felt the weight of the audience's expectations. Tommy opened with a slick argument, clearly well-rehearsed. He spoke about the importance of incentivizing innovation and argued that wealth redistribution stifled ambition. His delivery was polished, and the audience responded with murmurs of approval. When it was Marcus's turn, he took a deep breath and began. His argument was grounded in empathy and logic. He spoke about the struggles of families like his own, who worked hard but still couldn't make ends meet. He painted a vivid picture of what fairness could look like, emphasizing that economic growth and wealth distribution didn't have to be mutually exclusive. They could work hand in hand. As he spoke, Marcus noticed something shift in the room. The audience leaned in, listening intently. Even Tommy's smirk faded, replaced by a more serious expression. When the debate ended, the judges deliberated for what felt like an eternity. Finally, they announced the winner, Marcus. The auditorium erupted in applause, and Marcus felt a wave of relief and pride wash over him. He had done it. He had faced his fears, his past, and his doubts, and he had come out on top. A moment of gratitude. After the competition, Gerald was waiting for Marcus outside the auditorium, his face glowing with pride. "You were incredible," he said, pulling Marcus into a firm handshake. "I knew you had it in you." Marcus grinned, his cheeks flushed from the praise. "Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you." Gerald shook his head. "You've always had the potential, Marcus. All I did was help you see it." As they walked to the car, Marcus thought about how far he had come. From the boy who had hesitated to share a granola bar with a stranger, to standing on a stage and holding his own against someone like Tommy. It was a journey he could hardly believe was his own. The ripple effect. Back at home, the trophy from the competition took its place of honor on the living room shelf. Ava beamed as she showed it off to anyone who visited, and Letitia's pride was evident in the way she told the story to her coworkers. But the impact of Marcus's journey went beyond his family. His story began to inspire others at school, both old and new. Even Tommy, humbled by the experience, approached Marcus one day to apologize for the way he had treated him in the past. "I underestimated you," Tommy admitted. "You're not the same kid I used to know." "Thanks," Marcus replied simply, knowing that his actions had spoken louder than any words ever could. The future forged by resilience. The days following the debate competition felt like a whirlwind for Marcus. His phone buzzed with congratulatory texts from classmates, Teachers stopped him in the hallways to commend his performance, and even the principal took a moment during morning announcements to recognize his victory. It was all surreal, like stepping into a life he'd once thought was reserved for other kids. Kids who didn't have to worry about bills, hunger, or struggling to belong. But Marcus knew better than to let success go to his head. This victory wasn't just his. It belonged to his family, to Gerald, to everyone who had believed in him when he struggled to believe in himself. New opportunities. A week after the competition, Gerald invited Marcus and his family to a formal event hosted by his foundation. It was an evening gala at a downtown hotel, a world away from the modest apartment Marcus called home. The invitation felt daunting, but Gerald insisted it was an opportunity to celebrate Marcus's accomplishments and network with others who might help shape his future. "Marcus, this isn't just a party," Gerald explained over the phone. "It's a chance to meet people who can open doors for you, people who want to invest in young leaders like you." On the evening of the gala, Letitia helped Marcus into the new suit Gerald had gifted him. She brushed invisible lint from his shoulders, her eyes brimming with pride. "Look at you," she said softly. "My little boy, all grown up." Marcus adjusted the tie nervously. "Do I really have to wear this?" "Yes, you do," Letitia said with a laugh, pulling him into a hug. "You look like $1,000,000. Ava, dressed in a frilly dress that made her giggle every time she spun, ran into the room. "Marcus, you look like a movie star." "More like a penguin," Marcus muttered, but he couldn't hide the smile tugging at his lips. When Gerald arrived to pick them up, Marcus stepped into the sleek car, his nerves buzzing like static electricity. As they drove through the city, the towering skyscrapers and glittering lights made him feel like he was entering another world. The gala. The ballroom was dazzling. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over tables draped in white linens, and a live jazz band played softly in the background. Servers weaved through the crowd with trays of hors d'oeuvres, and conversations buzzed with energy. Marcus felt out of place at first, his steps tentative as he followed Gerald through the room. But Gerald's presence was steady, guiding him with a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Marcus," Gerald said, stopping by a group of well-dressed individuals, "I'd like you to meet some friends of mine." The introductions blurred together. CEOs, philanthropists, educators, all of whom seemed genuinely interested in hearing Marcus's story. He spoke hesitantly at first, but as he recounted his journey, his confidence grew. He talked about his family, the struggles they had faced, and how Gerald's kindness had set him on a new path. By the end of the evening, Marcus had collected a handful of business cards and even received an offer to visit a prestigious summer leadership program. Letitia, standing nearby, watched with tears in her eyes as her son navigated the room with a poise she hadn't seen before. A gift for the future. At the end of the night, Gerald pulled Marcus aside. They stood near a large window overlooking the city skyline, the lights twinkling like 1,000 stars. "I'm proud of you, Marcus," Gerald said. "You've come a long way in such a short time." "Thank you," Marcus said. "But I couldn't have done any of this without you." Gerald shook his head. "You've had the strength and determination all along. I just gave you a nudge. And now it's time for the next step." Marcus tilted his head, confused. "Next step." Gerald reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "This," he said, handing it to Marcus, "is a scholarship to one of the top private high schools in the country. It's fully funded, including room and board, so you won't have to worry about anything except your studies." Marcus's eyes widened as he opened the envelope, his hands trembling. The scholarship letter was printed on heavy paper, the words almost too grand to believe. "I don't know what to say," Marcus whispered. "Say yes," Gerald said with a smile. "This is your chance to build the future you deserve." A difficult decision. At home, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, staring at the scholarship letter. The opportunity was incredible, but it came with a cost. The school was far away, meaning he would have to leave his family behind. The thought of not being there to help his mom with bills or take care of Ava weighed heavily on him. Letitia sat down beside him, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "What's on your mind, baby?" Marcus sighed. "What if? What if you need me? What if Ava needs me? I don't want to leave you." Letitia's expression softened, her love for him shining in her eyes. "Marcus, you've been carrying this family on your shoulders for too long. It's time for you to think about your future. We'll be okay. I promise." "But what if?" "No what ifs," Letitia interrupted, her voice firm but kind. "You've worked so hard for this. You deserve to chase your dreams." Ava ran into the room, clutching one of her drawings. "Marcus, look. I made this for you to take to your new school." She held up a colorful picture of their family standing under a bright sun, with the words, "We're proud of you," scrawled in crayon. Marcus's throat tightened, and he pulled Ava into a hug. "Thanks, Squirt." The farewell. The day Marcus left for the new school was bittersweet. Gerald arrived early to take him to the train station, where a representative from the school would meet him. Letitia and Ava stood on the platform, waving as the train pulled away. Marcus watched them until they disappeared from view, his heart aching with a mixture of sadness and hope. He clutched Ava's drawing tightly, a reminder of the family he was working to make proud. The journey to the new school was long, but Marcus used the time to reflect. He thought about where he had started, sharing a granola bar with a stranger, and how that small act of kindness had set off a chain of events that had changed his life. He realized that every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. The first day of a new chapter. Arriving at the school, Marcus felt a familiar wave of nervousness. The campus was sprawling and beautiful, with towering buildings and students bustling about. But this time, he reminded himself that he had earned his place here. As he stepped into his first class, the teacher smiled warmly. "Welcome, Marcus. We're glad to have you." Marcus took his seat, his heart steady with determination. He didn't know what challenges lay ahead, but he was ready to face them. He wasn't just a boy from Brooklyn anymore. He was a boy with a dream, a plan, and the courage to chase it. A legacy of kindness. Years later, Marcus would look back on this moment as the turning point of his life. He would graduate from the prestigious school, go on to college, and eventually start a foundation of his own, dedicated to helping kids from underprivileged backgrounds achieve their dreams. And it all began with a single act of kindness, a granola bar shared with a stranger on a cold afternoon. That small gesture had created ripples that changed not only his life, but the lives of everyone around him. Marcus had learned that success wasn't about where you started, it was about where you dared to go.